Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the conclusion of chapter 4 in Tanya. I'm really excited about this chapter because chapter 4 really redefines spirituality. I often find that people define spirituality as a feeling. And if they're a little more sophisticated, as a knowing, as an awareness, as a consciousness. As a presence. But what Tanya chapter 4 does for us today is it really transforms that upon its head. I've always said that every single chapter of Tanya is a paradigm shift. And if you haven't experienced the paradigm shift, then you didn't understand the chapter. If something in your life didn't turn upside down, then you have to do it again. You just didn't understand it. I often find that when I study the Rebbe's teachings, particularly the Rebbe's teachings, that I have to study them like 6 times before I really begin to understand them. You can learn something once and, okay, got it. But you don't really get anything. You got to do it 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times before you can really get comfortable with the material and move. Remember how we learned in chapter 3 the evolution of Chachma, Bina, Das, the idea, the comprehension of that idea. And when you're taking in such a massive, gargantuan concept, you've really got to be able to have the power and the tools to be able to digest that. And then to go to the third level of das, of knowledge, of making it personal, making it yours in the evolution of wisdom is a beautiful and enriching experience. But today, we're going to be talking about redefining spirituality. And that is as follows. In all of those examples that I gave you earlier, about spirituality being a feeling and a warmth and a love and a consciousness and an awareness and a higher consciousness. All those are nice, they're beautiful. What they all have in common is they're not physical. All of the above are not physical. There's physical, in our little world, we have physical and then we have spiritual. Spiritual is things like love, hate, feelings, understanding, wisdom, music, all that stuff. That's all spiritual. You can't say the music is physical. It is absolutely spiritual. But that's not what we're trying to achieve over here in our Judaic experience. Being a Jew is not about being spiritual. In fact, you'll notice that we have the most non-spiritual religion. We're constantly drinking wine. Seriously, yeah, it's Shabbos, we have to make Kiddush, and the wine has to overflow, and tomorrow morning also, we have to make Kiddush, the wine has to overflow. End of Shabbos, it overflows. Again, the Havdalah, right? The mayor came once, the non-Jewish mayor came to visit the rabbi once in a small town. He comes to spend Shabbos with the rabbi, they come Friday night. He wants to see how the Jews live, right? Comes Friday night at the rabbi's house, they go to shul, have a little schnapps before davening, they pray, they make Kiddush at the shul with everybody, overflowing, comes home, makes Kiddush with his wife and kids, they drink through the meal. Then they sing, they dance, it's beautiful. The next morning, they daven, they make Kiddush, they drink, they have a few more l'chaim. They're constantly drinking through the Shabbos. At the end of the Shabbos, the mayor says to the rabbi, the rabbi, it's beautiful spending Shabbos with you, I loved it. I don't really understand why you guys don't do the light switch thing. I don't get why you can't flick the light switches. But I totally understand why you don't drive on the Sabbath. So here we are. We're so. You know that in the Talmud it says that when somebody passed away, there were 14 cups of undiluted wine that they would drink. Thank God they did away with that. They sort of modified that one. It was a little too much for the people to deal with. But these were the cups of what they called them, the cups of bereavement. But not just that. We spend so much emphasis on food. food. You know what my house looks like on a Friday? Oh my God, you know? We're just like Jews, and the food just as you're safer getting between the mother bear and her cubs than between the Jews and the Kiddush, you know? And we're really into our food, you know. We have the Catholics come here on Shabbos once in a while, and they say to me, Rabbi, I want to join your congregation. In my church, we're lucky if we get a piece of cake and coffee, you know? Here you get single malt scotch. This is great, you know? So we're a very physical religion. Other religions, you know, they're into like this meditation. They're into abstention, very into abstention. All sorts of abstention, physical, verbal, sexual, all sorts of abstaining. The church, the priest doesn't get married, right? And the Muslims, they don't drink alcohol, right? The Ramadan, they don't eat for a whole month. I mean, we fast, but a little bit. We just fast 6 days a year. That's it. Simple. 7 days maybe. But these guys are fasting a whole month. For us, it's a mitzvah to eat. It's a mitzvah to procreate. It's a mitzvah to get married. You know, the high priest, if he wasn't married, he's not qualified. He's got to be married. In the church, if he's married, it's like a sin, you know? By us, it's a mitzvah, right? We're a very physical religion, and we wonder, what's going on over here? Are we trying to be spiritual, or are we not trying to be spiritual? The answer is no. We are not trying to be spiritual. Everybody else is trying to be spiritual. Jews are not trying to be spiritual. Why? We are not trying to be spiritual. We're trying to be holy. The world thinks that physical is somehow associated with evil. Desire, things that I want, food, drink, you know. Yeah, it's like things that I want is physical. And now it's just spiritual is the opposite of the physical. It's holy. Tanya chapter 4 says absolutely not. Not at all. Spirituality is not about how you feel. I feel so elevated. I feel so passionate. I feel so joyous and loving. It's not about that. That's not holy. That's spiritual. You're feeling spiritual, but that's not holy. That's not the goal. You know, when I heard once that there was some sort of a reconstructionist rabbi, woman, and I think she told me once that she wears tefillin at the Seder. That's when she wears her tefillin, at the Seder, because that's when she feels most spiritual. And I looked at her, I'm like, I didn't say anything, but, you know, at the Seder, I'm glad that that's how you feel spiritual. And she's right. She feels spiritually, you know, uplifted at the Seder, and that's great for her. Assuming that this is all about you and about how you feel. What we are trying to do, however, is it's not about us. We're trying to become holy. The goal is to become holy, and the question is, how? How can we become holy? How do you become holy?
Aren't you born holy? You are holy. You don't have to become something that you already are.
So whilst we have a soul, Gail, which is a piece of God, fair, we definitely struggle with a identity crisis, because we are, as chapter 2 in Tanya clarifies to us, we are by definition schizophrenic. We have two souls constantly fighting against each other, the animal soul and the godly soul. And more often than not, we identify actually with our animal soul. And we're not really identifying with our godly soul. Right? In fact, to the point that in the morning prayer, as soon as we wake up in the morning, you know, that second, we first say the bathroom prayer. Right after that, when we say, Elakai neshama shenatata bi, Tahorahi, God, the soul that you have placed within me. As if to say the soul is within me. There's me, and then there's the soul that you've placed within me. Right? So we are, by definition, according to that, right, we are identifying as our body, as our physical beings. And Tanya will develop this theme through the next 20, 30 chapters about how the purpose of our existence in this world is not in order to repair or uplift the godly soul. The godly soul is doing great. The godly soul was sent here as a special forces mission to help and assist the animal soul and the body to become holy. And that's what we're talking about right now. All right?
Yeah, I guess I just see it differently, but
Okay, so let me develop the theme here. So, because it's quite a theme here. So, how do we become holy? As Corey pointed out, before what you said, the way to become holy is by becoming one with Hashem, with God. You have to become one with God. That's the only way you can become holy, because only God is holy. So if you can connect to God, you are now holy. If you've not connected to God, you're not holy. You're just you. How can I connect to God? You said mitzvahs, right?
Doing mitzvahs. How you act.
How you act. Now doing mitzvahs is exactly what the theme is here. We often think of mitzvahs as these sort of cute little tests that God is giving us just to check our obedience, to check if we're listening, right? But that's a very immature, spiritually immature level of understanding the mitzvahs. We don't do mitzvahs just because God is sort of checking our behavior. It's some sort of a discipline report. That's not what a mitzvah is. Elsewhere in Chassidus, it's explained that the word mitzvah actually comes from the word tzavta. I think I mentioned this last time. Tzavta is a team, like a tzevet. A tzevet in Hebrew means a team. This is the staff we're the catering team, we're the audio-visual team. We had all these teams here on Sunday night. They were doing things. You had 40 workers, 4 different teams. Tzevet is a team. And a mitzvah means connecting like a team. It connects as one, it bonds as one. A mitzvah connects me, lowly me down here below, to a sublime God up above, and it connects us. Right? Like a connection. But Tanya chapter 4 says even more than that. The mitzvah is not just a connector, as some sort of a portal to God. The mitzvah is infinity itself. The mitzvah, the act of the mitzvah, captures God's essence itself. How? We say that there's a saying in the Zohar that says, in the place that you'll find God's greatness, there you will find His humility. Now that doesn't really make sense. It sort of means how do you understand that? It means God's greatness is that He's also humble. I guess He's, amongst His accolades is that even He's also humble. Right? So I'm a rabbi, I'm a father, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a billionaire, and I'm humble also, right? It's kind of what it means. It's it doesn't really make sense. His greatness is also in His humility, right? But the way that the Alter Rebbe explains it now is that His greatness is His humility. The greatness of God is that He lowered Himself to the point that finite and mortal human beings can have a deep, real relationship with Him. He infinity, which is something which we cannot fathom because we are finite by definition, has contracted itself into a little box this big, which I put on my arm, and a little box that I put on my head, or into a little cow's hide that I put on my door, or a string that I'm wearing out of my trousers. Infinity has contracted itself into specific specifications because God desired a relationship with me. Because God desired a meaningful relationship with you. When we do a mitzvah, we're not just connecting to God. We are capturing God itself. It's not like a telephone line to God. We're actually embracing God, or more specifically, God is embracing us. When we do a mitzvah, when I wear that tefillin, when I put the mezuzah on my door, then God is embracing my home. When I wear the tefillin, God is giving me a hug. Because God has chosen to place his infinity within a finite little box or a finite little object. Now that sounds a little strange, by the way, that infinity can become finite. Right? But remember this, and we learned this in the What Is course. We learned this in the What Is course. Bob, I remember doing this with you specifically. That we said that the greatness of infinity, and this is not something which we can fathom because we're finite, right? We think of infinity as infinite. But the greatest of infinity is that it can even become finite. Because if you were to say that infinity cannot become finite, if you were to say that something unlimited cannot make itself limited, then you have limited unlimitedness. Does that? I was trying to say that again slowly. It's not that difficult, especially for you, an engineer, right? No, great.
No, infinity is about not having
limitations
at the ends. It's not about what's where we are.
Yeah, because the problem is that we think. I just want to say it again slowly, okay? To be unlimited means that you don't have limitations. There's nothing you cannot do. If we were to say that something unlimited can do anything except be limited, then you've limited unlimitedness. So infinity and unlimitedness can make itself limited. It can, right? Kashem sheyesh lo koach bebilti bal gvul, just like it has the ability to not have a limitation. Kach yesh lo koach bigvul, so too he has the ability to make himself limited. She'im loikein, because if it cannot make itself limited, hariata memayet shleimusoy, you are limiting its perfection. Right? So basically what we're saying is very simple, it's really not that complicated, is that God, who's unlimited, can make himself limited. If he decided that I want to be contained in this book, if he decides in the words, the sequence of Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, in those 43 letters, however many letters it is, I think it's 248 words in the Shema. Right? If in those 248 words you have captured my essence, if you've decided that, that means that when you read those words, you have now been embraced by God's essence because he's placed himself in that essence. You have now captured godliness. You are no longer spiritual. Spirituality is irrelevant. You've become holy. You've incorporated God itself within you by reciting those words, by doing that mitzvah. And this is why this is what it means when the Zohar says Kud Shabrichu, Oraita v'Kud Shabrichu, the Torah and the Holy One, blessed be He, Kula Chad, a one and the same. God and His Torah are one. It's not like God wrote a book, and when you read a book, you get an idea of who He is. That's not what it is. When I write a book, you get an idea of who I am because I wrote it, but you don't capture me. J.K. Rowling is not living in my house because she's on my bookshelf. But when it works with Torah, it does work that way. God and His writings are one. One. When you capture God's writings, when you read them, when you understand them, even if you don't understand them, even if you just read them. And Tanya chapter 4 here says, just reading the 24 books of the Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the 5 books of Moses, the prophets and the writings, Esther, Shir Hashirim, Tehillim, whatever. When you just read the words of Tehillim, you have captured God's essence. You've captured infinity itself. And that's why the opening word of the 10 Commandments, the first revelation of infinity to humanity, is an Egyptian word, Anochi, I. Why did he use this word, I am God, your God? Anochi. It's an acronym for Ana Nafshi Ktavit Yahavit. I, my essence, in my writings have infused. I, my essence, in my writings have infused. God's essence is infused inside of His writings. This is what it means to study Torah. Torah isn't just really nice stuff. Really interesting entertainment if you have a good teacher. It's not just, what should we do today? Should we watch a movie? Should we go study Torah? It's not just entertainment. It's a totally different caliber. When you study Torah, you are having a rendezvous with God, with infinity, with God's essence.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this concept, so this is how I'm understanding it. So just tell me if it's the same thing, and I'm just using different words around the idea of infinity, making itself finite. So that I don't relate to that, but the way I'm understanding it is that there's a piece in us that is infinite. There's a part in me, like a certain essence that was never born and will never die. Like when my physical body leaves this earth, there's a part of me that will keep going, and that's the infinite part of me. So my understanding is that when we connect to God through whatever the means are, we all have our ways, but when we connect to God, it's not that God is making himself finite, which doesn't make sense to me, but it's that it's tapping into that infinite part in us, and we are connecting to that part in us when we're doing God's mitzvah, because then we're realizing that the part in us that's real is never going to die. It's never going to leave this earth. And that's the part that's really matters. And through that, when we're in that space, then all of a sudden our egoic needs become irrelevant.
Right. So let me be more specific about this, because you're definitely pushing me in the right direction here. The format in which the Tanya presents it is like this. You know how we spoke in chapter 1, we introduced the animal soul. Chapter 1 of Tanya. In chapter 2, we said it's not evil, it's just self-serving, it's just self-centered. As I mentioned earlier, it's about ego, just about self-preservation. Nothing wrong with that, it's just animal soul. Chapter 2, we said we have this soul which is like out of this world. It's literally not of this world. It's God-centric. It's a piece of God, right? It's a piece of infinity. Chapter 3, we started analyzing within the godly soul itself, and we're going to do it later to the animal soul in chapter 6 and 7. In chapter 3, we said, okay, what is the soul? So what is it? We said that there's 10 attributes of the soul. 3 of them are intellectual, and 7 of them are emotional. That's basically what we said, right? Chachma bina da'at, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And then we said there's the 7 emotional attributes. There's there's what I'm aware of, and then there's what I feel. That is the soul. In chapter 4, we introduced a topic, a concept. We said, by the way, in addition to the soul itself having 10 attributes, intellect and emotions, you also have 3 forms of clothing. Right? We said the 3 forms of clothing are thought, speech, and action. This is how we dress. You don't always have to be dressed. Sometimes you could just not be wearing anything. Right? You could just be feeling. Right? Like in a physical sense, you might not be wearing anything. When your soul is not dressed, you're just feeling. I'm just feeling. I'm feeling happy.
It could actually be above feeling and below thought. And
yeah, exactly. It's a beautiful place. What do you call it?
Equanimity.
Equanimity. I always say that word wrong. Equanimity.
It's like a state where you're
just balance.
You're
Beautiful.
not thinking and you're not feeling. You're
just being.
And you're perceiving.
It's just presence, and you're almost like watching, right?
Yeah, it's like you can perceive.
But you can see where you're not engaging thought, speech, or action.
I did it yesterday. Like I was in front of this incredible tree, and the branches were just whatever, and I literally just took a moment where I was just like connecting with the branches, but I wasn't thinking.
Right, so you see, beautiful. So you've got there where you're not engaging any garments, any clothing. There's no thought, speech, or action. You just feeling, or on an intellectual level, which is actually a little higher than that, is a state of awareness. A state of awareness. Good. That is the soul disrobed, naked. And that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. I can now choose to wear something. So what am I wearing? Am I going on a hike? Am I going to a wedding? You know, we had a lot of confusion about the Sunday night event. It was cocktail attire. There was a lot of stress. What does cocktail attire mean? Do I wear a tie? Do I not wear a tie? Jackets? No jackets? It's like, come however you want, just show up.
Women have no problem.
Yeah, the women had it easy. The men all stressed out. They were like, oh, I don't know what to wear. I'm like, just show up. So,
anything other than flip-flops and shorts.
exactly. Yeah, well, so we should have said that. No flip-flops and shorts. Finished. So we choose how to dress up. So what I want to do right now. So I happen to be engaging the garment of speech right now. You guys are engaging the garment of thought right now, which is great. Just happens to be the way we're operating right now. And I'm doing a lot of action because I'm Jewish. I'm talking with my hands, right? But it seems, what's more important? The person wearing the clothing or the clothes? What's more important? My Hugo Boss shirt or me? Your action. You're saying the clothing. So my shirt is more important than me.
No, you are. No.
Not the action. Me. So I am more important than my clothing.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
Hang on a second. No, if I had to choose between me or my clothing, what would you choose between?
Well,
You go for the person. I think you'd go for the person. The clothes we can deal with, right? It's fungible, right? But the person itself,
The outer self, right.
right? So obviously, the person is more important than the garments dressing the clothing. So the feeling and the awareness, intellect and emotion, is more important than the thought, speech, and action. Obviously, comes Tanya and says, "No, you got it wrong. It's the other way around." Why? And this is coming to your answer. Why?
That's how you interact with the world, with the thoughts.
Interacting with the world, so who what? Who cares? Interacting with the world, so what?
That's how you...
Fine, so garments, and you're right, garments are all about, you only really need clothing when you engage with others.
Yeah.
That's the only time you ever need. If you're in the shower, you don't need clothing. All right? But when you're engaging with others, you need clothing. You need clothing, but so what? Why does that make it more important? Right? Why does it make it more important? The reason why clothing, this is a revolutionary concept, that clothing is more important than the, what do you call this? What's the English word for the wear, the
essence?
There's a word for the one clothed, for the being. It's called the being, right? So to say that the clothing is more important than the being is almost ridiculous. It sounds like a good ad for Saks Fifth Avenue, but it's not good for it doesn't make sense, right? Here's how the Tanya explains it so beautiful. How I feel and what I'm aware of, my intellect and my emotion, at the end of the day, is limited to me. It's all about me. And I can only feel, and I can only be aware of how wise I am, and there's different levels of wisdom, by the way. There's certain people are far smarter, and other people are just thick as a brick, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just the name of the game, right? Some people are smarter than others. Some people are more emotionally developed than others, right? Some people are more musically gifted than others, right? I melt when I hear Berka sing, as he did the other night. It's just of another world, right? Some people just have different gifts, So when you are more some people are. If I'm feeling spiritual, that's great, but it's all about me. If I'm understanding or if I'm aware, it's I am aware, and I can only be aware of as much as I can go. It's like I'm tethered to me. I can only go out as far as me. But when it comes to the clothing, look at this extraordinary transformation. Look at what this benevolent, loving, almighty being has done for us. God didn't just dump us on planet Earth and say, guys, knock yourselves out, work it out. He says, I'm putting you on planet Earth, but I desperately am anxious to have a meaningful relationship with you. I want to love and feel you. I want to be loved and felt by you. How's that going to happen? The only way it's going to happen is by mitzvahs. As we explained earlier, it's actually Torah and mitzvahs, right? Which is not just a connector to a telephone line to infinity. It is infinity itself. I have infused my essence into my writings. The Torah and the Holy One, blessed be, Kul Achad are one and the same. When I do that mitzvah, at this moment, as you're listening to Torah that's coming out of my mouth, being taught through the Tanya, we are all experiencing infinite godliness right here at this moment. We could not do this without the mitzvah. Right? Mitzvahs can only be done in three ways: thought, speech, or action. There's no other way to engage the mechanism of a mitzvah other than thought, speech, or action. I can feel, but I'm not feeling a mitzvah. I'm not doing anything. A mitzvah has to be done, spoken, or thought. Right? Remember how I said earlier that Judaism is a very physical religion? It's not just about transcendental meditation, which is nice and fun and spiritual. It's just not holy. It's just not, when I say holy, I mean grasping infinity. That's because at the end of the day, it's my feeling and it's my knowledge. The only way I can have a truly out-of-body experience and connect with infinity is only when I'm connecting to God. How do I connect to God? How can I possibly connect to God? I can only do that on God's terms. If I say that I feel godly at the Seder night, when I wear tefillin, that's very spiritual. I'm not going to argue with her spirituality. She feels inspired at that moment doing that action. That's great. But God doesn't feel the same. How do I know? Because He told us. He said, I want you to lay tefillin in the morning on the regular day, not at the Seder. In fact, I don't want you laying tefillin at the Seder. That's how I know that that's not what He wants. Right? If I want to connect with a very important person, if I want to connect to the President of the United States of America, right? I can't say, well, I feel very presidential at Thursday mornings at 9 a.m., right? So therefore, this is my presidential connection. It's not going to make any difference. But if the president says, hey, come to my office at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday night, right? On a certain date, that's going to be very presidential. I might be tired and bleary-eyed, but it doesn't matter. That's what He wants to connect with me. And even if I'm not feeling presidential, who cares how I feel? It's about the connection, right? You know, we're learning now in the Torah, in the weekly Torah portion, about the sacrifices. And I always say it's a mistranslation to call them sacrifices. It's not a sacrifice. A sacrifice means a waste. Wasting this animal's life and wasting that animal's life. It's a shanda. It's an embarrassment to slaughter animals. Right? It's terrible. The real word is korban, which means an offering, a closeness. That's what the meaning of a korban is. Karov, which means close. What we're doing is the following. Remember, there's 4 strata within creation. There's the inanimate, then there's the vegetable kingdom, the flora. Fauna is the animal kingdom, and then there's the human kingdom. And each one is limited to their glass ceiling. The inanimate, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom. Each one has their glass ceiling. And you'll notice that the only way that the inanimate can break through its glass ceiling is when the inanimate is eaten. When the water is eaten, when the salt is licked by the vegetable kingdom, and it gives life, it becomes a plant. So it's broken through the glass ceiling. It's had an out of body experience, and now the inanimate is becoming vegetable. And then the vegetable is eaten by the herbivores, by the animals. They're now becoming incorporated within the animal, and now the animal is eaten by the human. Now that the animal now becomes the next level, the human. But what happens to the human? Who picks up the human? The human is stuck with this glass ceiling, all of which we are all included in what's called creation. We are all limited, finite beings. That's what we all have in common. We are all stuck in our finitude, in our limitedness, in our limitation. Comes God and He says, I want to connect with you. I'm throwing you a connection. I want you to become infinite. Wow! We can break our glass ceiling. We can jump that chasm from finite to infinite. We can go from creation to become part of the Creator. And the way we can do that is by forming a meaningful union, a meaningful intimacy with the infinite God. That cannot be done on my terms, can only be done on God's terms. It's only when I do the mitzvah or when I study the Torah in which infinity has invested itself.
But isn't that
When I do that, let me just finish this point. When I do that, I have now become godly for the duration of that mitzvah. And incidentally, the residue remains. And it's a whole different discussion about how once everything we touch turns to light, things become and retain holiness, like a Torah scroll. A Torah scroll is holy even if I'm not using it for Torah study. It becomes holy, right? Things retain holiness. We are illuminating this world 1 square inch at a time by engaging this physical world with our physical religion. Remember, it's our physical religion. What we're doing is we're not trying to be spiritual. We're not trying to escape this world. We're trying to make this world holy. That's why we take animals and plants and tables and chairs and foods and alcohol and all things that we do. We try to make them holy by connecting them with the mitzvah, by using them for a mitzvah, so that the wine becomes infinite, so that the kishka becomes infinite, the cholent, the herring, the kichel, the goulash, everything becomes infinite. And ultimately, when there's enough light in this world, then we reach Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point. Right? Yeah? Yep. Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point, which is what we call the coming of Mashiach. What's Mashiach? The glory of God will be revealed, and all fleshly eye will see that the word of God has spoken. We will be able to physically see with our fleshly eyes infinity. We'll have X-ray vision to be able to see the essence of everything. And that is a messianic reality. That is what we're trying to achieve right now, is to be able to see the fruits of our labor. And I just wanted to conclude before your question there, is that I wanted to just say that coming back to the animal sacrifices, the korban, what we're actually doing in temple times with these animals, is that we're allowing the animals to also become godly. You'll notice that whenever we do an animal sacrifice, it incorporates always salt, which is the inanimate kingdom, always flour from the vegetable kingdom, always an animal from the animal kingdom, and always a human being who is bringing the animal, incorporating all 4 strata of creation, korban, coming close to God, because remember, the animal sacrifice offering is itself a mitzvah, and is an act of infusing infinity inside of this physical world. So yes, from a spiritually disconnected perspective, the animal sacrifices seem wasteful and primitive, archaic. But from a more spiritually informed perspective, we realize that we're actually uplifting all of creation through this experience. And that's why there was that story with Elijah, on the Mount of Carmel by Haifa, when he was having this they were dealing with the idol worshippers, and they were having this test, to find out who the true God was. It's a long story, but the idol worshippers, both of them were going to bring an animal sacrifice, and whichever one had the fire come out of heaven would be the one that would be proven to be the true God, right? So it says that the bull, two brother bulls were offered, one for idolatry, one for God. And the brother bull that was going to the idolatry came running under Elijah's cloak. And the Medrash tells us that it was like, it beseeched Elijah, why should I be offered up for an animal for idolatry? Why should my life be wasted? Because to be slaughtered for idolatry is a total waste of life. Why should I be wasted? And Elijah then explained to the bull, whatever that means, the angel of the bull, the godliness within the bull, whichever way you want to interpret that by you being offered to idolatry, you will be sanctifying the name of God. By being offered to idolatry wastefully, by the fire not coming out of heaven to consume you, you will be sanctifying the name of God in an indirect way. And that too will be an uplifting for you. So, Elaine, go ahead.
So my question is maybe semantics, because when you're saying we're connecting to infinity, earlier you explained how infinity can contract into finite objects.
Yes.
Which would include the Torah and our holy books and whatever. They are finite objects, so they represent a contraction of the infinite.
Yeah.
So when you say we're connecting with infinity, we're actually still connecting with a finite.
Which contains within it contracted infinity, correct?
Yes.
Because we can't engage with infinity.
Exactly.
We can engage with finite actions, finite speeches, and finite thoughts, which are which contain within them infinity. Because God, in his humility, in his greatness, contracted himself into humility to make himself palatable, connectable,
But it's still,
accessible.
But it's finite,
Yeah, it is finite.
in the sense that,
Because we wouldn't be able to engage any other way. We would be totally groping in the darkness. It would be total cruelty for God to put us in a world trying to reach him with an inherent inability to do so. It would be like a torturous labor. Like you're putting us in a position where we do not have the ability to connect with him. So what did he do? Put us in a world where we're still groping in the darkness, but thank God he gave us the book of Tanya, for which, remember, the Alter Rebbe sat in jail for 53 days. A day corresponding to each chapter of Tanya, because in heaven they were like a little upset that he was releasing this godly wisdom to mankind. But thank God they eventually acquiesced. Because we needed this. The Alter Rebbe argued that this exile is so dark, we need a little guidance to help us from our groping in the darkness. At least we now realize that's a window, that's a door, and this is a tool to connect to infinity. So don't try and knock yourself out getting out that door. That's not going to get you to infinity. This will. And this Tzitzis will.
So, I've been blessed to know many Jews who have given huge amounts to charity, raised huge amounts to charity, who have saved Jewish lives, Soviet Jewry, Ethiopian, on and on and on, but are not religious. You know, two-day a year of Jews. And we're people, so those are all mitzvahs that they've done, enormous mitzvahs. How does that all play out?
Great question. So Harvey, it's not all or nothing. The Chabad approach, and now you can appreciate it, is that we didn't even, to us the term secular Jew is an oxymoron.
That's good.
Secular means unholy. By definition, there's no such thing as a Jew who's never done a mitzvah. There's no such thing as a Jew that I can write off as, you know how there's an expression of, I can't stand it. Here in Palm Beach, sometimes people say, I have no use for that person. And I'm like, I can't stand it. It's such an arrogant, condescending approach. What do you mean you have no use for that person? That person has a connection to infinity. How do you write that off? You know, who do you think you are? To us, every single Jew is invaluable. There's no such thing as an unholy Jew. You know, when the Rebbe started this movement called the outreach movement. After the Holocaust, there was a lot of opposition from other Jewish groups, which eventually later on joined the bandwagon. And somebody said something about, they called it Kiruv Rechokim. Kiruv Rechokim, which roughly translates as bringing close those who are far. And the Rebbe protested vehemently. What an arrogant approach. Can you please stop saying that? The Rebbe said, he was like, don't call them Rechokim. Who do you think you are to say that they are far and I'm close? I'm going to make them like me. I'm going to make you guys, you lowly people, like me. Like, well, who do you think you are? How do you know that this guy sitting in front of me here isn't far more holy than I am as the teacher? Right? Well, just because I happen to be teaching this class, therefore I'm more holy than you. So maybe right now in this particular study, I might know a little bit more than you, but so what? It doesn't mean that I'm holier than you. Do you see what I'm saying? The Rebbe was vehemently opposed to calling anybody Rechokim, distant ones. Right? Because every Jew is close. They might not realize it, but they're close. Right? Great question. Were you going to say something before, Gail, or?
Yeah.
You seem like swirling thoughts all the time. It's good.
No, I mean, I'm going to be honest, I disagree with some of it. I mean, I love what you said, and the logic was great, but like, for example, I disagree with the idea that you need Torah to connect with God. And the reason I think, not that you can't connect to God through Torah, I'm not denying that. There's no question that one can connect to God through Torah. But, Abraham had an incredible connection with God, and he wasn't following a scripture. He was just in tune with the infinite part of him. And I feel like, I struggle with this because obviously I do want a relationship with God, but I feel that sometimes when I'm following scriptures, it's not coming coming from, I agree with you about my emotions don't matter and it's not about me. I get all that and I agree with you. And I work very hard at emotional mastery because of that in my life. But I also feel that when something is dictated from an external source, it doesn't have the same power of connection that something has for me.
Okay, so I want to address that. I'm trying to address those 2 points. The first thing you said is that Abraham had an intuitive connection to God, and I disagree with you, because Abraham did what God commanded him explicitly. Abraham,
it came from inside of him.
He was told what to do. He was instructed.
By who?
By God.
By God. From where? From inside.
God spoke to him. God spoke to him, and he said, "Sacrifice your son. Bring your son upon the altar." So I don't want to get too sidetracked right now, but just generally speaking, because I know this is something we're going to have to work with even on a private level, which is totally cool. I'm totally happy with that. But just to address your question, at least in the context of the group here, is that Abraham was instructed to do some crazy things, including bringing his son up upon the altar. You know, that's not something which he intuitively felt was going to be some spiritual move. You know, that was something which he was instructed. It explicitly states in the Torah that God spoke to Abraham and he says, take your son, your firstborn, the one whom you love, and do whatever, right? So that was the first thing I want to say. The second thing you said was that you spoke about some third-party source, right? And I just want to say, it's not that the Torah is a third-party source, and I think this is the exact concept which we all need to assimilate. And remember I said before that you need to learn something 6 or 7 times sometimes before you can begin to really relate to it. I think that your inability to understand this concept is indicative of your truly struggling with it. An authentic, raw, real struggle that you're going through right now, and a real soul transformation that you're going through. I think it's a very authentic perspective that you just gave. But I want to lead you towards that point that the Torah is not a third-party source. It is the source. It is not only a book written by God. You know, people are not sure today. First of all, they're not sure if there's a God. Second of all, even if there's a God, I'm not sure if that God wrote the Torah, right? So we're way beyond all of that stuff right now. We're saying not only did God write the Torah, God is the Torah, right? You know, in Harry Potter, I love watching Harry Potter with my kids because within Harry Potter, there's all these little analogies. I don't know where J.K. Rowling gets her info from, but she must have studied some Kabbalah. In one of the segments over there, there's this part. I'm sorry to be so crass, but I just love this part. There's this part about a diary of like the guy Voldemort, you know? There's his diary, and his diary is his soul. I don't know if you know the story, but at one point they stab the diary with a basilisk tooth or something, and that kills not just the book, it kills the Voldemort guy, right? The bad guy. And I said to my kids, it's such an interesting concept, because the same truth is about Torah, where the book itself is the author. It's not just that the book is a manifestation of the wisdom of the author. It is the author. You kill the book, you kill the author. Right? And that's just a part. Again, I'm not putting Harry Potter here as recommended reading. I'm just saying that element I thought was very beautiful. That it was a concept which is truly a Kabbalistic concept. I just want to try to wrap this up in the last few minutes that I have of here, right? Just to tie everything in together. So it turns out that a mitzvah is not just a conduit to God. It is God Himself, infinity itself, captured. Which is why the Zohar gives us an analogy that the mitzvahs, remember the 613 mitzvahs, right? That the 248 positive mitzvahs, active mitzvahs, and the 365 passive mitzvahs, the ones that we don't do, don't kill, don't steal, right? Those ones, they're called limbs of a body. And at the very end of the last session, I said that our soul has 613, our body has 613 limbs, right? 248 organs, 365 veins and sinews, which correspond to the 613 organs of our soul, parts of our soul, 248 organs, spiritual organs, and 365 veins and sinews of our soul. Remember, we have intellect and emotion that breaks down into 613 parts, which parallel the 613 parts of the body, which parallel the 613 mitzvahs. So when we've engaged the 248 positive mitzvahs, we've engaged the 248 parts of our body and illuminated the 248 limbs of our soul. Same goes with the 365 passive mitzvahs, 365 physical veins and sinews, and 365 spiritual veins and sinews, which basically means it's the complete observance of the 613 mitzvahs. You can't just do one mitzvah and say, oh, I've done one mitzvah and now I'm infinite, I'm good, I'm great. What? I'm holy, and guess what? Like I said to Harvey, you are holy. But just because you gave $1 million to charity, it doesn't mean you shouldn't light tefillin tomorrow or light Shabbos candles, because you know what? There's a part of your soul that's still dark.
Even if the building's named for you.
Yeah. Even if the building, he's got that mitzvah of tzedakah. That mitzvah of tzedakah is a shining light. But guess what? His tefillin organ and his Shabbos organ and his kosher organ is quiet, right? It lights out over there. You know what I mean? So you got to be alive. I don't want, a person that's on life support, right? They're breathing, right? They're alive. But let's get the rest of the body moving here, guys. Shake a leg, if you know what I'm saying, Right? Let's get the whole body animated and dynamic. I just want to finish this point, Ross. So the thing is that you want to activate all of me. All of me wants to be alive. All of me wants to have a meaningful connection with infinity. Not just one piece of me is breaking the glass ceiling to have a connection with an out-of-body experience with the Creator. I want all of me to have that out-of-body experience, to have that higher connection. It's beyond the higher consciousness. It's a higher truth. I want all of me to be alive and well out there, not just one little part of me or two little part of me or 7 parts of me, right? This is why the mitzvahs are called limbs in the analogy. Because just like a physical limb, what's a limb? Look at this, look at a limb. It's like a little thumb here, right? This thumb is physical, right? But guess what? My soul is within this thumb. Would you agree? The fact that I can move it by whim and will. Remember, will is a very important element of the soul. The fact that this thing moves exactly how I want it to, thank God, right, means that this physical thing, this limited thing in your question, incorporates within it my soul, which happens to be infinite. Right? That's the reason that the Zohar tells us that a mitzvah is compared to a limb, to give us a really good analogy. That a mitzvah is a physical object. You got this mezuzah on the door. It's like my thumb. It's a physical thing. But like my soul can capture a spiritual infinity of my soul within it, of my godly soul, so too that little mezuzah on the door is able to incorporate and capture within it a piece of infinity, right? And that's the reason, folks, why Torah is compared to water. I think I mentioned this last time. Torah is compared to water, as opposed to light or wisdom. What I'm sharing with you today, you've heard from me. If you shared with your friends today over lunch, you're passing it over. And if your friends pass it over to their children, it's going to be like a third-party transmission, right? It's going to be a little diluted, a little lost, right? The light that comes from the sun is not as strong here as it is on the sun because it gets diffused, right? But water is the very same water at the top of Angel Falls and at the bottom of Angel Falls, right? From the very, very, very highest level to the very, very lowest levels, it doesn't change. It's the same water. Right? It doesn't get diffused, right? That's why Torah is called water. Because just like water, which originates at the highest levels and comes down to the lowest levels without changing, so too Torah and mitzvahs, when it starts at the highest essence of God and it comes down to this physical, very physical world, it cascades down. It's still the same water. It's the same infinity. It doesn't change, right? And with this, I just want to conclude the very end of the chapter, which gives us a paradigm shift about heaven and earth. The Gentiles will often speak about, the believing Gentiles, they speak about heaven as a really good place to be. And they use it as a real comfort when when a Christian says to each other, they're in a better place now. You've heard that, I'm sure, right? They're in a better place now. You never want to say that to a Jew. It doesn't go well with Jews. You agree, right? You say that to the Christians and they're like, yeah, hallelujah. Yeah, they really do believe in this stuff. They really believe that heaven is a better place, right? And certainly the Muslims believe that. They're
They got all the virgins waiting.
yeah, you know what the one jihadist said to the jihadist mother said to her friend, her neighbor, these children, they blow up so quickly. God forbid, it's macabre. I know it's macabre, but they do raise their children tragically. This terrorist, the terrorist who killed a father of 12 last week in Israel, stabbed a father of 12 to death. The mother, she said, I am proud of my son, and that video was shared over 50,000 times on social media. It's tragic. What a tragic message of abandoning this world in the favor of a better world somewhere else, right? Like in heaven, right? This is a very non-Jewish approach. Because what the Torah tells us about heaven, you'd think that heaven is a good place, right? You think Judaism certainly believes in heaven. Yes, we do believe in heaven. But here's what the Mishnah tells us. Yafa sha'achat b'tshuva u'ma'asim ba'olam hazeh. It's better to have one moment of tshuva, teshuva, which means return, and ma'asim tovim, and good deeds. One moment of that in this world, mikol chayei ha'olam haba, then all is better than all the world to come. If you had to choose between one moment of a mitzvah in this world versus the entirety of heaven, we would always choose this moment in this world. Why? Because in heaven, it's just like that awareness that you were feeling, that emotion you were feeling yesterday by the tree, that it's just me and my awareness or my feeling. That's what heaven is. I don't have the ability to do, speak, or act or think in heaven.
You're not in the field.
You can't do mitzvahs in heaven. You can't do mitzvahs in heaven. You can only be. What you've reached, you've reached. You're assigned your hotel room and you go up there to the heavenly court. They give you a penthouse suite overlooking, with a view, without a view, depending on how you did. Right? They give you your thing, and then you're there. You've arrived. You've got your suite or whatever you got. Maybe you get a little something by the garbage. I don't know. Whatever you get, right? You get something, right? But that's it. You are what you are, and now you are able to feel and be aware of only as much as you've achieved in this world. You can't go more. So yes, you're basking in truth and in awareness and in beautiful, consciousness, but you cannot progress. It's only in this world where God is allowing us, and ground zero, where He's allowing us the ability to connect with it. I'm saying it because this called God a male is like shallow. I'm calling it with infinity, right? To be able to connect with infinity. Godliness has masculinity and femininity together. It's one. So to be able to connect with infinity, you can only do in this world, only on God's terms, right? That's why one moment in this world is infinite, but the whole world to come is just limited. It's finite, right, Rosalind?
Yes. You would accept Harvey if he didn't lay tefillin.
Of course.
He's welcome here. We're
Of course.
Orthodoxy. Where I grew up, you're not. That's a whole different ballgame. Either you follow every rule there or you're out.
Okay.
And that's the difference, I believe, between a Chabad and, how do I explain, Orthodox.
Look, if you want to, I do think it's a bit of an overgeneralization, because God forbid, I don't want to slam any other groups or anything, but if you want to generalize and say maybe Orthodoxy is more about judgmentalism.
Totally.
Okay, I know you've had personal experiences in that department.
I would say.
Yeah, to name a few. All right, good. But I just want to say, fine. Okay, but it's not our mission to, by us saying that we're not judgmental and they are, guess what? We're being judgmental. Right?
They
So,
say that you are incorrect.
okay, so let's not point fingers. Let's ourselves reach clarity. When we're comfortable in our own skin, we'll be able to spread the love around to everybody else. So let's ourselves be comfortable in our own skin today to identify with who we are. Yeah.
I have a question. You said that it's better to have just a moment of time here to do a mitzvah than having the olam haba. Okay, why is the soul then so upset when it leaves Hashem to come down into this earth, into the world?
Okay, so it says you're born against your will. Bal korchach atochai. You're born against your will because the soul is very comfortable where it came from. It's comfortable. It's not pleasant. It's not. The soul initially does not sense the ability to connect with infinity. It takes us at least 13 years to be able to start to fathom this concept. I mean, look at our community. It took us 13 years just to be able to have this conversation today, right? So the soul doesn't initially sense the ability and the need, or even the concept of being able to break out of its own shell, out of its own skin, right? But once it's able to taste the experience of a mitzvah, then the Mishnah says, Val karcha chatameis, you die against your will. Because even though you came into this world against your will because their soul wanted to stay up in the heavenly comforts, once it's down here, it doesn't want to leave here. Because it now begins to sense the extraordinary greatness of the mitzvah.
Right, but because of reincarnation, the soul that goes up again after death eventually goes through the same thing where it doesn't want to be.
Yeah, we have this problem. God likes to play this joke on us where He gives us this little amnesia thing. We forget where we came from. I'm trying to finish with one last point, guys. One last point on the chapter. And that is, one last point on the chapter is like this, is that, how we say that, we've been saying this example of how we're capturing infinity as it's enclosed in a physical object or physical mitzvah, which is why the garments are more important than the soul itself, thought, speech, and action, because the mitzvahs is the only way to connect to infinity. So it's a little funny to say that you're connecting to an infinite God through a physical act, thought, or speech, right? The analogy that Alter Rebbe gives at the end of the chapter is when you're hugging the king. If you're hugging the king, right? Does it matter to you if the king is wearing 7 layers of clothing, a shirt and an undershirt and a jacket and a coat and a whatever, right? If the king is wearing 7 layers of clothing when he hugs you, or if the king's wearing just 1 layer of clothing, it doesn't really matter. What's the difference? It's still the king that's enclosed within, right? And that's the analogy that Alter Rebbe says at the end, is that when we are hugging God, it doesn't make a difference if God is enclosed in the mezuzah or in the tefillin or in the Shabbos candle or in the Shema Yisrael, right? It's just another layer of clothing, as if when you're hugging the king. And the last point I want to say, which leads us to next week, is like this: is we spoke today generally about Torah and mitzvahs. Loosely, we spoke about Torah and mitzvahs, about how they are capturing infinity, right? And that concludes chapter 4. But in chapter 5, what the Alter Rebbe is going to do is going to make a stark differentiation between the two. He's going to say, what he's going to say is like this, is that mitzvahs allow God to embrace us. But what's extraordinary, even compared to mitzvahs, is that when we study Torah, not only does God embrace us, but we also are able to embrace infinity. And we'll talk about that in chapter 5. But in closing, what we've said today is the goal is not to be spiritual. We're not trying to be spiritual, because spiritual is just the opposite of physical. Like, what's the point? What we're trying to do, let me just finish the point. What we're trying to do is not go on a spiritual journey. We're trying to be holy. To be holy means to be godly. To be godly means to break out of creation and to become a part of the Creator. The only way you can do that is on God's terms, through the mitzvahs and the Torah. When we do that on God's terms, and He wants us to do that through physical stuff. Through eating cholent and eating whatever it is. I mean, maybe not cholent, but through drinking the wine, and through having the bris, and through getting married, and through buying the house, and giving the tzedakah, and making money, and whatever those physical things are, those physical objects are how we capture infinity. Again, it's not about being spiritual, it's about being godly, it's about becoming infinite and breaking our own glass ceilings. Sorry, Warren. Thank you, everybody.
Wow. Thank you.
On my spiritual journey.